Well, we have here the plan for today, working a little bit more on managing a database. We've already got one that we've made a few changes to. We're going to be adding a few more things, such as a thing called an action query. It can be very dangerous, very powerful, just like about everything in databases. And then we'll also be adding some validation rules. So let's get going. We'll open up our Access Project 3 that we started last time. And we've been making most of the changes so far to our veterinary vendors. Let's just review what we've done and remember what we want to do with databases, or what our goal is here. Some important concepts here. If you have a backup, you'll be happy. Well, these people don't seem to be very happy. They had a successful backup. Not sure why they're not happy. These people are not happy either. They're not sure if their backup is successful. These images were generated by AI. You can use AI to actually create images. I've used both ChatGPT and Copilot to generate an image. For Copilot, I had to sign in before it would generate images for me. I'm not terribly impressed with its image. That I'd asked it, this is the exact phrase I gave it, create a cartoon illustration of the importance of a backup for a database. I don't have to give it complete or perfect sentences, but I'm not terribly impressed. Does that say backup is important? No backup, he's happy. No backup, he's sad. You can sort of guess what he means, but you have to know what the images were going to be before looking at it. I'm not terribly impressed. Same with Copilot. They're both sad. There should be a happy and sad. They did a backup, they're happy. They did a backup, or their backup failed and they're sad. So AI images, I'm not terribly impressed yet. Maybe if I made it clear what I wanted, I might get a better image. Copilot takes a long time to give you an image. If you ever played with that, you look at it for about a minute, where ChatGPT comes back in a few seconds. But still, the quality of the image and illustrating the point I'm asking it to make, kind of lame. So maybe if I did better at the query phrase, I might get a better image. Maybe I have to say simplify it. I don't need a complex thing. I just need one happy person and a sad person that did not do backup. But remember how important backup is. Remember, backups, we don't have to go through the wrap. But when we make mass changes, that's what we're talking about today, making mass changes, such as everyone's total has been updated, or everyone's zip code has changed, or everyone in Utah, they have a new discount, a new tax rate. Those are the kind of things that you need to update your database, and you've been saving the tax rate for every person because of the state they're in. And if you design the database, it would not be so, if properly, it may not be so hard. But sometimes you need to make changes to everything, and that's where the queries come in handy. And here's how you would make a mass change. We're going to do this. First of all, we just create a normal query, like I'm looking for certain things in my table. With that query, you can turn it into now that it's a normal query, I can change it, adding some criteria for what I want to change, and then change it into a different kind of a query called an update query. We can, and an update query can also be a delete query, or a make a table query, or append something to the table from the query. Lots of powerful capabilities in creating the queries. So let's go ahead and do that. Once you make the query, decide what it's going to be, you tell it what you're going to update. Then you check to make sure that that is updating what you want it to update to, because there are no backups or there's no undos for this. And then you run the query. So let's go do that. I'm going to go to Access and create that query. And I'm going to go into Access now. And I'm going to start with just a normal query. Just start with normal query, and then we will decide how it's going to work. So first of all, I choose the table, and I just view the data I have. And I see that in that table, there's the vendor name, its address, city, state, the supply, the thing they supply us, and that last field, the product type. What we'd like to do is update the product type. Now we've typed it in already, but we're going to run an update query to make sure the product type is correct. Okay, so there's the table. We can close the table now. We just want to take a peek at the table so we know what we can modify, and we see that we'd like to make sure that anyone producing a vaccine does get the product type set to VAC. So I can close the table now. I adjusted my column, so yes, I'm going to keep those changes. Now we create the query just by creating a normal query in Query Design. And the table I want to make changes to is the veterinary vendors. So I double click veterinary vendors. And just going to leave it as a normal query right now. Let's just take a look. How about at the vendor name? Let's see. Yeah, we'll do the vendor name and the product type, or the veterinary supply, and the product type. And I can just run that query without doing any criteria yet. And I see there I get the name and the product type. Go back to design. And let's say every veterinary that supplies something that has VACC in the name, we want to change the product type to VAC. So let's set the criteria to be like, or actually I don't even have to put like in there. I can just do quote star VACC star. And that means VACC is somewhere in the name of what they supply us. That's the criteria. And let's run it again just to see, do I get those? Yeah, those are the companies that get listed. And now that I have the criteria, and now I can say, well, if I find all those that have VACC in the name, I want to update product type to make sure the product type gets changed to VAC. This is where I now decide to change the query from a select query to an update query. The select query I can run just to see, is the criteria right? Then I come back to design and I change it into an update query. Now that it's working and finds all the companies that have VACC in the name, I change it to an update query, which gives me a new line, update to, in the design field. Now I can do the update to, and this is where I can put VAC. To make sure I'm only changing those vendors that have VACC in the name, make sure their product type is VAC. Now we saw on the table that it already has VAC there, but this would be something that maybe I would run regularly to make sure that I haven't accidentally set the product type to be not be vaccine for someone that actually does have VACC in the name. Now when I run it, this is where it will actually make a change to my table. And I can click the exclamation point to run the query. It'll warn me, you're about to change, update 3 rows. And it reminds me, you can't undo the changes. And yes, I am sure. And I click yes. Now suppose I type something wrong in here, like V, and I forgot that we want it to be updated to VAC. If I run this, it'll give me that warning again. How do I know it worked? Well, I can come over and open the veterinary vendors table and see that the product type did get changed to V for all those that have vaccine in the name. I can go back and fix my query, say, wait a minute, I meant to update it to VAC, not V, and I can just run it again in the query design I can run it again, and it will change it to the proper thing, VAC. How do I know it worked? Well, come over here. I can see, yes, the product type got changed back to VAC. So very powerful. And again, imagine it's more than just 3 that I could have done by hand, no problem. But hundreds or thousands of records that need an update, and this query does that for me. So that's the mass changes. These are the ones that can save you tons of time, but they can also be very dangerous, and that's why having a backup before you start doing mass changes like this, in case something goes wrong, you can always go back to before you made all those mass changes. Now we want to save this query that we created on page AC3-26 by doing a Control-S save. AC3-26, we'll call it a mass update, VAC product type. So remember how we did that in query design. We first made it just a regular select query, make sure we had the right criteria, ran it to see yes, it does pick out the right things. Then I change it to an update query and change what I want to have differently or modify in that particular table. So I can use the criteria to make sure I only update the necessary ones. If I didn't have a criteria here, it would change all my records to have VAC in the name, which I know is not what I want, because I know that's a microchip supplier, not a vaccination supplier. So having the criteria correct allows me then to make sure I change only the correct products. If it's a change to everything, then I run it without any criteria. So remember, without a criteria, you're going to change everything. And it's always safest to run it as a normal select query first to make sure you are changing what you mean to change, and then change it into an update query. Okay, let's go on with more things we do as we're maintaining a database. Remember, these things that we're doing for maintaining databases, this is where you'd have perhaps a database consultant that would regularly come and check. Do you need changes to your existing system? You have some software that uses a database. When they bring out an update, it may be something that they've realized they had a problem, or they had an improvement, a new feature that required a database change. These are the kind of things they'll do to improve the features in a particular product. And people that know databases can have a good career, can make decent wages. Now we would like to make some changes to make sure when they're entering data into our tables that the data doesn't get entered incorrectly. And yes, I made a slight change to that. And I'll cancel any changes because I was just messing with it. So, validation rules now, or settings on our tables. Let's look at our veterinary vendors again. There's the data in the veterinary vendors. Go to design view, and we see that each field has properties down below. We would like to change the properties of our zip code field. Let's take a look at what its properties are. Right away we see, well, the field size of the zip code field is 255. That's way more than is needed for a zip code, and it's wasted space in our database. It's reserving that much space for every zip code of every person that I have in my database. So we don't want to waste space. We're going to change the field size of the zip code to 20. I'm not sure why we don't change it smaller, but perhaps some do have extra fields. Maybe some countries have very long zip codes. Changing it to 20. We would also like to make sure that when they're entering a new vendor, they don't forget to enter something in the vendor name. So down here in required, I can change required by double clicking. I can toggle it to yes. I can require that be yes. But all that means is there's something typed there. It doesn't mean it's a valid name. It could be just random numbers for all we random characters, but at least we're making sure there's something typed in the vendor name. So it's not that great a field, but it does at least make sure they haven't forgotten to type something. You could add more validation rules to make sure they don't type something that doesn't make sense, or you could even have code that checks to see is it a real company. But that's beyond these simple capabilities. So we could require the name, and we could also require that the quantity that's specified when they're saying the number of things they're supplying to us or that we have in inventory. Right now, it can be a single precision number. Can be negative or positive. Well, we better make sure that the validation rule, down here in the validation rule setting for quantity, let's make sure that the quantity at least is greater than 0 and less than 1,000, or less than or equal to 1,000. So that validation rule would look like this. The greater than, little arrow pointing to the right, greater than 0, and the word and then the less than symbol, less than or equal right next to each other means less than or equal, and less than or equal to 1,000. So if they ever try to type something either negative or more than 1,000, Access will give them a very unfriendly message unless we put in the validation text the actual message we want. Let's see what the message looks like before I put in a validation text. I'm going to switch to datasheet view, saving my changes, and it's warning me I have changed some validation rules and the existing data may violate the rule, but I'm going to continue anyway. And it's again warning me I'm going to make sure that the validation rules are applied, and I click yes. Now let's try to enter a negative number in the quantity. Let's change that 51 to negative 51 and see what it does. When I hit enter or go to another row, it'll give me a very unfriendly message. One of my values are prohibited by validation rule greater than 0 or less than 100. Set the veterinary vendor's quantity. Enter a value that the expression for this field can accept. Not a very helpful. Most people stop reading about the third word, close the window, and then call IT and say there was an error. I don't know what it said, but there was an error. And IT will pull their hair out and say, wait a minute, did you send a picture of the screen? Well, we don't want that ugly screen or that ugly message, scary message and intimidating. I can fix the data and it's happy. Let's go back to design view and make that a little more friendly message. Down there in the validation text, I can put, please enter a positive number less than, or I could say from less than, or maybe say up to 1,000. Up to 1,000. Oops. Make it do we make it required? Yeah, we make it required. Up to 1,000. Well, a positive number, 0 is actually a positive number. Instead of a positive number, we might say greater than 0 up to 1,000. Enter a number greater than 0 We did say the validation rule is greater than 0. I'm not sure, well, why would they be a 0 in the quantity they've supplied? Maybe there's a reason. But we're going to require it's greater than 0 up to 1,000. Maybe I should say and up to 1,000. I want to try to make correct grammar. And always use the word please when you're giving instructions to users that are intimidated already, not happy with computers. Let's see what it looks like now when I come in datasheet view, saving my changes. It's warning me again, even though I really didn't change anything, because I was down there in the validation text. It does warn me. Yes, we go yes. Now let's see what the message is when I try to change that to a negative 51. It doesn't give me the warning until I leave that cell and I get something a little friendlier. Please enter a number greater than 0 or up to 1,000. So our validation text replaces that long, scary, and unintelligible to the normal person, ignored by many people if it's intimidating. So make it a friendly message, and now there's my validation rules. Remember, the purity of the data is very important. So if we were doing this right, we would put a validation rule on everything, like vendor name. We might even have a limit on the length. We might have some code that actually runs when they try to make a change and have it go check some database. Is it a real company? Street address. Checked with the post office. Is that a valid address? You see this when you go to websites. You enter your registering. They will actually run code in the background to check. Is that a valid address? And they may even suggest, I think this is the address you actually meant to type. Even when you put email, they send you the validation email. It's all because they want that data in their database to not be inaccurate, because that's the basis for all the queries, all the spam mail that they want to send you from now on. They want to make sure it gets to you. So there we've made validation rules now for entering data. Let's see if they have us do any more validation. Oh, the product type. We would like now, back in the design of that, in the product type, we would like that to have a default value of VAC. So perhaps most of our vendors are supplying vaccination. So rather than our data entry people having to retype that, let's just set the validation rule to, or the default value to be VAC. I type VAC and then I click off of it. It puts quotes around it for me. And what we see the effect of that, making the changes again, I see the effect of that is anytime I'm adding a new record, notice VAC is already filled in for me. Doesn't mean I can't change it, it just means I don't have to. But remember, we made that a lookup, and we see that by default it's going to be VAC. Let's see what else they'd like to do for the validation rules there. We would like to, similar to the greater than 0 or less than 1,000 rule, for the product type, we want the validation rule to be this. Down in the validation rule for product type, we want to limit it to only the valid product types. So we put a validation rule of VAC, we put equal VAC, or equal MC, or equal SUP for supplies. If I click off of that, let's see if it puts quotes around things. Yes, it puts quotes around things for me. If I click off of that, it changes the OR to capital O. And again, let's add nice validation text to say, please enter VAC, MC, or SUP. And let's make those capitals. We don't want to, I don't think it's case sensitive, but let's make sure we check that it's capital VAC, MC, or SUP. So validation rules with a reasonable, nicely readable, not intimidating message of please enter one of these. And now let's test that that validation rule works. Let's come back to datasheet view, saving my changes, checking the rules, and now let's try something in here. Let's like add an extra P to sup. It does let me type that, but if I click off of it, it'll give me that message. Sorry, please enter one of these. I do have the opportunity to do Control Z, and it remembers the change. Normally, I should only be able to choose one of these, but because of the setting there, it does let me type something. It does let me enter an invalid text, but it doesn't let me go because of the validation rule. It'd be nice if the validation rule would change it back to the original, but it doesn't. I have to manually fix it, or Control Z, fix it, and then it lets me go to the next record. So design view, I can put all sorts of validation rules here. Let's see if they want us to do any more validation rules. Yep, they have us change the validation rule, they have us test that they work, and we get the nice messages because we've added the validation rules with nice validation text. So remember, the validation text is an error message they'll see. If you don't put validation text, you get a scary, intimidating, and unintelligible message from Access. So we've already done the changes. Remember last time we made changes to the product type. We made that a lookup field. And remember, we also made changes to the appointments table. If we go to the appointments table, we made changes to what the service was going to be at particular appointments. We made that a multi-valued field. Because the multi-valued field doesn't allow me to type anything, we don't need to put a validation rule, because multi-valued by default doesn't let me type in a wrong thing. So that's what's nice about the multi-valued. I can't type in the wrong thing because there's not a place. I can't type here. It doesn't let me type. Where the other one does let me type, even though it let me look it up originally. So we modified the data using the lookup. Now we get to do something a little less technical. We're just going to change the appearance of our data sheet. I can close my appointments table, and we're going to change the appearance of some things here. We want to see the total row in the veterinary vendors table. They like us to make all the changes to this. So let's open our veterinary vendors data sheet view. If we want to see totals, easy peasy, click right here on the little totals button. That toggles the totals, and then a total row shows up. But I still have to decide where do I want to see a total? Well, I'd like to see the total in the costs. So I click here, and I can now click down and choose the sum of all the costs, and it shows me the sum. Suppose I want to see the average of the costs. The totals row, basically, this should actually say, show me mathematical summaries, but that's too long to spell. So I can choose, other than total, I can give the count of how many had a cost, or the maximum or minimum, or the very fancy standard deviation. But sum is good enough. I just want the sum of the total of the costs of all my products. Now, the sum of the quantity, that might be useful. I could ask for the sum of the quantity as well. Here, what can I ask for? Only thing I can ask for is how many actually have a product name listed there. So if it's only words or short text, I can only count how many fields have that entered. If I don't choose anything, nothing shows up. So anything that's just a short text, the only thing I can do is I can count them, and it wouldn't make sense. These are short text, not numbers. Numbers are allowed to give me more details in some numerical calculation, but it's limited to this set of calculations. If I don't want to see the totals, I just toggle off show me the totals, and then I see that. It remembers what I had. So now when I close it, or go to datasheet, go to design view, come back to datasheet view, the totals will always be on. If I close that table and I come back to it, the totals stay on because I turned them on when I was in datasheet view. So it remembers the setting for the totals, and to just turn it off, you can toggle it there. I think I'm going to leave it on because that number may be useful to me. Now some more things that are more in the appearance, changing the grid lines. They would like us to change the grid lines, and to do that, I can go over to is that right over here? The grid lines, right here. Is that the grid lines? Yeah, there it is. I can decide whether I want to see the grid lines. Let's see, let's do no grid lines. That's no grid lines. Turn them all on, and I get little grid lines. Hardly visible to me, but they show that there's that possibility. What else do they do in that? I think you can alternate the colors here. That would be in that third one, or that last one here. I can alternate the colors in my grids. Choosing an alternate color. Pretty cool, huh? I can choose a theme color or a standard color in my alternating colors. I'll let you choose your color. Makes it look, I suppose, a little more flashy to the people viewing this. If it's a wide table, it might be easier to line up numbers as I'm searching across for numbers related to something way over on the left. I can change the font of my data sheet. I'll let you pick any font you like. Lots of fonts. If I don't go script, I don't know, sir. I'm not sure why anyone would want to choose script for my font, but I'll let you go choose whatever font you like. Have fun with it. I like something readable, so I like Arial. Calibri is nice and readable. I don't like Times New Roman, but I'll let you decide which one you'd like to choose. There's a good font, huh? That shows very great skill. Let's see what else you can use. That's it for the formatting. Oh, there is more. Remember down here, whenever you see these little extra box, that means there's extra things I can do. If I want to see all the options, I can turn this on. And that lets me see all the effects I have. My background color, my grid color. I could choose a grid. Say I want to show the grid. I want a nice red grid. And I want to see a raised cell or a sunken cell. Choose my alternating background color. And it shows me the sample of what it would look like here. Border and line styles left to right or right to left. And click OK. Let's see, I can hardly see the difference there. Let's try right to left, see what that looks like. Oh, I see. It switched my fields completely around. I think I'd rather go left to right. So that extra little dialogue there lets you play with everything, and you can make it look crazy as you like. Once I close the table, all the changes I've made can be permanent if I click yes. So go ahead, you can make whatever changes you like, and we'll see how creative you got. Whenever I go to open that table, it will remember the settings. The other tables are back at their default settings. Any table you make the changes to, it remembers. So individual changes to the style. It's not changing the data. Usually all we care about is that we have valid data. But if we're viewing this in datasheet view enough that we'd like to adjust the appearance, that's how we can do it. And anytime I make any adjustment, it saves the changes to that specific table. The database programmers, all they care about is the data, not the appearance of the data. Now that we've made changes to some multi-valued fields, remember in our appointments, we have multi-valued fields here. Suppose I need to do a query for everyone that has a, say, a T4 service in for their appointment. I want to write a query now that has to do with a criteria based on a multi-valued field. It makes it a little more complicated. Let's see how that's done. Remember how to create a query. Create, query design, and we want to create a query on the appointments table. So double click appointments. And since we're dealing with the multi-value field, that's going to be one of them. We would like to know the appointment ID, the patient ID, the appointment date, and the service abbreviation. Notice here, instead of service abbreviation, I could choose service abbreviation dot value. Because it's a multi-valued field, the service abbreviation dot value shows up. And let's delete the service abbreviation one. We just want the dot value. So I'm going to delete the service abbreviation, cutting that one. So all I want is the service abbreviation dot value. Now before adding criteria, let's see what I get when I view datasheet view. It shows me the values on separate rows. Notice here it's P12, patient 12, the same appointment. For each of the multi-valued fields that's selected, it shows up in a separate row in my query. So multi-valued fields, when I run the query, viewing the dot value, I view each row, or each value here becomes a separate row in the results, even though it's the same appointment. And now, in my criteria, I can now put T-4 and view it, and then I see just appointments that had T-4 in its value. So put T-4, it puts the quotes around for me. I don't even have to do a capital T. It shows me now just those appointments for that specific value of a multi-valued field. And that's why that shows up, because this is a special field that's been multi-valued. Now, if I want a criteria on a specific type of a service abbreviation, I choose a value, not just the name of the field. And now I can save that query as AC3-43 T-4 service from multi-valued. Yeah, we'll just do T-4 service. So a multi-valued field made my appointments query just a little more complicated. I choose the value instead of just the name of the field, and put the specific value I'm looking for from multi-valued fields. Now, something we've already done, but let's go review this now. Closing this query. Remember, we're doing database maintenance now. Let's go back to our database tools, relationships. This gets back to the design of our whole table, the whole scheme here, and let's review our relationships. And we have all these tables and how they are related. This is something that the database programmers actually think of while they are designing your tables, and hopefully this is making a little more sense now. If I arrange it, I see that appointments refer to a treatment number. Well, that treatment number is listed as the primary key of my treatment cost table. And that's the relationship to the appointments. When I'm referring to a treatment number, I have that relationship there. And remember, if I don't have that table, if I don't have that line there, I can add that relationship by dragging treatment number to treatment number, specifying referential integrity. And remember, what referential integrity means is I can't enter a treatment number that does not exist in the treatment cost table. Once I have this relationship, it will not let me enter an invalid treatment number here. I must have it being listed in the treatment cost table before I can ever make an appointment. And the same with all these relationships. I can't refer to a veterinarian that does not exist. They must be a listed veterinarian in my veterinarian table. Establishing these relationships basically forces, it's like a validation rule, it forces my database to only allow valid data in my tables. And again, am I referring to a patient? That's a patient that must exist in my patient table, or it'll say referential integrity rules have been violated when you try to enter the incorrect patient. It'll say that patient must exist in the patient's table. Same with an owner. If I'm referring to an owner, it must be an existing owner before it will accept its being entered in the appointments table. Any of these relationships I can edit, and let's go through the whole establishing that relationship. If there's not a line there, I want to establish the relationship. I drag owner ID to owner ID here. That makes that relationship required. And this is the very important one. This is where I enforce the you must refer to an existing owner or it will not work. That's how you create that relationship. You're telling the database, here's the relationship between these tables. It doesn't figure it out itself. You have to tell it in the database design. Without these relationships, I could enter a bunch of appointments and refer to just random number treatments, and it would be a completely worthless database because those appointments and those owners, they don't exist. This makes sure my database keeps the data pure as I enter data. The relationships between the tables. And it makes it more complex as I want to get the information out, but that's why we pay the database people a lot of money to do all that. Let's take a look at one relationship here, and this can be done on any relationship. I click on the line and then double click. If I ever change the patient ID, these checkboxes make sure that if I make a change to it, it does cascade to all the references. They don't show you in the book, but this is very useful. If I ever decide to change a patient's ID, this allows me to change it, and then it'll cascade or copy the changes, reflect the changes in all the tables that it's being used. So I change the patient here, it'll automatically get updated in my appointments table. So the cascade update is something that I can decide to enforce, and I can also say if I ever delete a patient, any records related to that patient will also be deleted. And that's a normal thing. Well, I can turn on cascade delete. So if I ever delete a patient, all the patient's records will get deleted from his appointments too. Sometimes you don't want that. You don't want to allow something to be deleted, or if you do delete a patient, you don't remove the appointments that we had for that patient a long time ago. Usually you want to because you don't want invalid data. So usually they do cascade, both cascade, delete, and update. The main thing we do in this chapter is enforce referential integrity. That idea that when we split up the data to avoid redundancy, we also have to add the extra rule, don't let me refer to a non-existent treatment when I'm referring to a treatment number for an appointment. Anytime I want to view the database relationships, again, I go to Database Tools, Relationships, and I can adjust my relationships, add any relationships if I add more tables. Again, this is what the database people will do and will charge you money for. When they tell you what they're doing, now you might have a clue of, oh yeah, we did that back in that wonderful course. I kind of have an idea what you're talking about when you specify, database design, table relationships. This is what happens in Access. So if you like this kind of stuff and it's not super intimidating to you, you can even teach people Access. That's like the junior level database, but you can graduate to even more powerful databases if you find this easy to do. You don't have to get into all sorts of techie programming. You can just be an expert at how databases work and have a decent career. Even just training people how to use Access, because you see it is more complex than Excel. Let's see what else we're doing here in this database. I think we may be done with most of the things that we want to do, having to do with relationships and enforcing referential integrity. They explain this in the textbook if you'd like to read more, and of course you could go online and say explain referential integrity. We'll do the last thing on Friday. There's just one more thing we're going to do, is back in our database tools, see what we have here. You can actually write code that works with your database. That's advanced things. You can mess with these other things, object dependencies, analyze the table. Let's just try analyze the table and see how that works. I can choose a table to analyze. Walks me through examples. I can choose what table to analyze. Just for fun, let's analyze the appointments table. Let the wizard decide. It says, oh, that looks good. It recommends not splitting your table. It says, look, things look good. We don't need to do anything more. So I can cancel because it's saying, oh, I don't need to do any changes. It will give you suggestions if you have the right design in your database. Here's the most important thing to do. If your database is ever starting to run slow, you can compact and repair it. Click on that, and it will run through some procedures to make sure that there's not any extra things in its temporary tables. And you notice it went really quick because we have a tiny database. Compact and repair happen very quickly. As your database grows, if you find it's getting slower, you can just come and say, let's see if we can speed things up. Let's just try compact and repair. It may repair some things that have gone wrong or are getting complex and may improve the performance of your database. We will end there in your database maintenance section. Friday we'll be doing a lot of review and begin practicing for the final. Can you believe next week? Friday will be an easy day, review and practice. Have a wonderful day.